This is Dr. Adam Matthews with Matthews Counseling, and we are here with Kenzie Davis, a LMFTA, and I'm just excited to talk with her today. Kenzie's specialty is with couples, but she also works with a lot of individuals. And this month, we are talking a lot about emotional wellness because as therapists, whether we're working with couples or with individuals, emotional wellness is so vital and is so key, right? So, Kenzie, why don't we just start off and talking about like what do you see as the value of emotional wellness and understanding and having the ability to identify our emotions?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think when I see my clients, one of the first things I talk to them about is authenticity, right? And just being who it is that you are. And I feel like if we're not able to identify our emotions, if we're not able to have that emotional IQ, that's kind of a way we're invalidating ourselves. Right?
Yes.
So that's why it's really important to me, right? If we're going to be authentic, that means knowing what's going on inside of us and being able to verbalize that and talk about it.
I think that is so huge and so important. And I love what you said there is like that invalidation of ourselves, right? Because a lot of times we tend to suppress our emotions, or we tend to work out of like really superficial emotional reactions to those emotions that we're having. And without knowing what they are, we can do a lot of harm to ourselves. And I like that you connect it to authenticity, right? Like it's important for us to be able to be authentic, to know our emotions. Could you say a little bit more about that? Because I think that's just such a hugely important component to what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, I feel like a lot of times in this world, right, we have to wear a certain mask, right, to be, I don't know, liked, professional, whatever the case is.
Yeah.
Right. And so sometimes that means people pleasing, right? Sometimes that means putting our stuff on the back burner to make sure someone else is emotionally regulated, or we're shielding them, right? Because we don't want them to know how hurt we are or how disappointed we are. Yeah. So I'm going to shield you, right? And just kind of mask what I have going on. Right. And so, right, we're not being authentic to ourselves when we're doing that, right? When we're people pleasing, when we're shielding other people. Right. Yes. It's just not fair to us, because eventually sometimes we play that role and we just continue that cycle and that pattern. And then we just default to, like what you said, pushing things down and not dealing with them, or just showing the reactive emotion instead of being vulnerable and saying, hey, this is what's going on.
Yeah, I think, oh my goodness, I think you say so many great things there, because that idea of when we're masking, when we're performing, when we're not being honest about what we're feeling, anything like that that's happening, that is so right, that it's not authentic. We're not being ourselves. And what you're saying is it has consequences, right? Like what do you feel like are the consequences of, if we keep doing that, if we keep pushing it down, what happens to us? Like what are the consequences of not being able to identify it, first of all, but then able to be congruent with those emotions? Like what happens? What are the negative consequences of continually living like that, you think?
Right. Oh man, I'm sure there's more than what I can even think of. Right. But the first thing that came up for me is, right, the constant feeling of feeling misunderstood. Right. You feel like people don't get you or where you're coming from. Right. But if we don't tell them, right, they're not going to.
They don't know.
Yeah, having that core belief that people don't get you, like people don't understand you, right? And then that can go into more core beliefs that you internalize about yourself, maybe about how you show up, right? And sometimes that can make us, right, have a little bit more depressive symptoms, right, in the way that we approach ourselves or other people, right? We may isolate more, right? So we have to be really careful. It's a slippery slope when we start.
Well, and it starts because it starts with those exact feelings that you're talking about. I'm misunderstood. I'm not loved for exactly who I am, which can lead to behaviors that isolate us. But more, I think what I would add to that is that it's disconnecting, right? It disconnects us from another person. So when we talk about relationships with friends, when we talk about with family, when we talk about relationships with significant others, it's disconnecting. It's distancing us from those people in our lives, and we're not able to to form connections that really matter and that are really fulfilling. Not to mention the mental health side effects, which go into like depression, anxiety,
Right.
a lot of fear-based stuff, a lot of that isolation and that feeling disconnected is going to produce, and it's going to bring. So I just think it has so many keys. In the blog post that you wrote for us, you talk a lot about that interplay between thought, feeling, and behavior, right? And how they influence each other. How what we feel influences what we do, and what we do influences what we think, and what we think influences how we feel. Then that kind of cycle that goes into. Could you talk about that for a little bit? Because I think it's super important, and it's not something we often think about.
Yeah. And so for me, once again, when I see my clients, right, I use cognitive behavioral therapy for the most part, right?
Yeah.
Because our thoughts are so influential, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy does say, right, that what we think influences how we feel, right? So if we're feeling pretty negatively about ourselves, we need to check our thoughts. That probably means we're probably having pretty negative thoughts about ourselves or the situation at hand.
Mm.
And in turn, if we're thinking that way, we're feeling that way, right? Our behavior is going to be, we're going to be less confident in ourselves, right? We're going to, I don't know, the behavior has to follow suit, right? That's just how we're wired. That's how it works, right? And so it is really important, right, to really identify those thoughts, right? Because we can have negative core beliefs, right, about ourselves, about situations. Right. And something I tell clients often, right? Thoughts are not always facts, right? We have millions of them throughout the day, and they will affect our emotion state. Right. And so you have to check those things.
Absolutely. And I think I love that too, because when we talk about being able to identify our emotions, thoughts and behaviors become kind of like pathways into understanding those emotions and what we're feeling. Right. And I think they allow us to kind of really go, okay, I'm having this thought, right? And it's producing this feeling in me, which is causing me to do this thing, which is reinforcing that thought that I'm having. And so like that ability, what I love about trying to kind of understand emotional wellness is it raises our self-awareness a lot, and it raises our ability to understand what's happening in our internal world, which then can connect it to the behaviors that we want to change. Because I don't know about you, I have occasionally when people come in with depression and anxiety or something like that, sometimes they're talking about, I don't like the way that I'm feeling. But a lot of times what they really don't like is the actions and their behaviors that are out in the world, and the things that are happening to those circumstances that are happening to them. And so like I think sometimes the disconnect, and you tell me what you think about this, but sometimes I think the disconnect in trying to understand our emotions has a lot to do with we want the change to happen first in our behavior or what we're doing or what we're seeing as a result of that in our outside world, and it's hard to connect that a lot of times to our inside world. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that's deep, right? Because it is. I'm hanging with you, but I'm right. And I think that's what it is. We have to give ourselves that permission in that time, right? To explore our inner world. I know there's so many distractions going on. We have social media, we have responsibilities, we have families, right? And sometimes we just don't give ourselves the permission, right? To just check in on me and see why I'm feeling this way and what's happening. And I think that's where we go wrong, right? We're kind of on the outside, right? On the physical part. The behavior.
We're focused. That's what I mean. Like we're focused on that behavior piece so much that we don't always explore how our inner world is either being affected or is affecting what we're doing. Because and again, I just kind of going back to this piece that I really love about what you wrote and what you've been saying is that inner world affects what we do. And it makes our behavior so much more congruent when we understand what we're doing and what's happening. And you talk about this too, is that and let me pull it up because I want to say it correctly and how you talk about it. The developing the ability to identify feelings and it allows us to distinguish what you need, and distinguish what you need can be learned, right? That idea that our emotions helps us distinguish what we need, right? And then moves us forward in what we need to be able to learn, right? And can you talk a little bit about that concept and that idea there and what that produces for us when we are able to start to identify our feelings?
Yeah, I think going back to actually what you said, right? You said when we don't identify right, that puts us in an arena of disconnect, right? We feel disconnected. And so, right, if we give ourselves that permission and that time to say, okay, this is how I'm feeling, right? Emotions are a signal to us, right? That, hey, maybe we need something, or also to other, right? Like, hey, this would be helpful for me if, right, you did this, right? And so, right, learning those needs, right, it just helps us feel connected, right? It feels like we're being true to ourselves, right? It feels like we are, right, getting what we need from that relationship or that partnership, right? And that we feel heard, we feel validated, we feel safe, right? That I can explore this with myself, or I can explore this with someone I care about, and they feel like it's important, right? They acknowledge it, and they show up for me and how I need, or I show up for myself and how I need, right? And so learning that you can do that for yourself, or right, with the trusted person, right, someone can do that for you. It's really helpful, and you feel more powerful in, right, learning about your emotions and verbalizing those as well.
That's right. I love that. And you have a tool, and maybe we can just end with this, because I think when we talk about you add a tool in your blog post called the emotion wheel, right? And I think this tends to be, I don't know about your experience with it, but when I offer this to clients, it feels revolutionary to them most of the time, right? Because being able to identify your emotions requires that you have language around it. And oftentimes, especially when we grow up, if we don't grow up in a particularly emotionally fluent household, we don't learn the right language to put to our emotions. And so what the emotion wheel does is it gives us, what is it, something like 230 different types of emotions, or it's a large number of like emotion words, right? Because when we talk about, we have those core emotions, it starts with the core, like these core emotions of anger, right? But anger, happiness, sadness, surprise, fear, right? And it starts with that. But what it's in part to me, what the emotion wheel is saying, and helps us kind of do, is say, okay, you may say you're angry, and I may say I'm angry, but what we're really experiencing may be totally different when we start to break it down a little bit, right? So that's how I use the emotion wheel. Do you talk about it in the same way? Is there a difference in how you talk about being able to identify your emotions using that tool in particular?
No, I agree 100%. Right. I have my clients like, let's talk about that primary emotion, right? Let's go ahead and identify that. But right, what is that secondary emotion too, right? So taking time to kind of, right, what is another emotion that is fueling, right, this primary emotion? So yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah, and when you kind of work your way out there, it really helps, because it kind of goes out to like, oh, if it's anger, right, there's some resentment going on, right? It helps you understand, oh, I'm feeling resentment. Oh, I'm actually feeling shame as well. And it helps start to kind of get to some roots of like, oh, this is what this is, and this is what's driving a lot of which is where I think the learning kind of starts to take place, right?
Agreed. That's right. We just have to give ourselves permission, right, and time.
Yeah. Awesome. Kenzie, thank you so much. If there's one thing, last question for you, like if there's one thing you want people to know about this idea of emotional wellness and understanding emotions, what do you think it would be?
Yeah, I say it 1,000 times during the day, right? And I would say it now, that your emotions, your feelings are valid, right? Whatever comes up for you, it comes up for a reason, right? And it's valid. And if you could validate that for yourself, even if someone else doesn't do that, validate that for yourself, that your emotions are valid.
I love that. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Kenzie, and thanks you for being with us. If you need help on identifying and understanding your inner world, your emotional world, that's one of the things that our therapists want to do. Therapists like Kenzie who can help validate those things for you and help you walk through the process of getting to a place where you can validate them for yourselves and understand what's happening for yourself. So thank you so much, Kenzie, for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.